Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Mark sent me notes this evening to check out this story from Colorado. Former CBI forensic scientist booked into jail on 102 felony charges. So Carol McKinley and Jenny Deem wrote this for the Denver Gazette. A former top Colorado Bureau of Investigations forensic scientist turned herself into authorities on Wednesday and was booked into jail on a 102-count felony indictment, according to county sources and court documents. She's 64 years old. She's being held in Jefferson County Jail on $50,000 cash bond, according to a spokesperson for the sheriff's office. She's scheduled to make a first court appearance soon. In a 35-page indictment, she faces felony charges including attempting to influence a public servant, perjury, forgery, and cybercrime, according to court documents. A district attorney said in a statement that the CBI estimated her misconduct has cost the state more than $11 million. She's a former CBI forensic DNA analyst at the center of a massive state scandal after it was disclosed in 2023 that she had deleted data, skipped steps, and manipulated DNA evidence in more than 1,000 instances over her nearly three-decade career. There's long been speculation that she could face criminal charges as the scandal unfolded over the past year, but it was unclear what those charges would be. The South Dakota Division of Criminal Investigation reviewed the case for more than a year to determine what, if any, criminal charges were involved. So this is good. The CBI said one of our own maybe committed crimes. Instead of us investigating it, which would always look sketchy, let's invite a neighboring state to send their people over and have them investigate it. So the DA says, based on the available facts and after careful legal analysis, we have filed charges and will now proceed with a criminal prosecution. My office remains committed to reviewing all affected cases within our jurisdiction on behalf of the defendant and victims involved. In the fall of 2023, an intern in the CBI lab reported suspicions that she was manipulating data, which prompted a sweeping internal review of her work dating back to 1994. It was later revealed by the agency that her work had been flagged by supervisors in 2014 and 2018, but those instances were never reported to the public, and she was permitted to continue doing her work. For much of her career, she was considered the state's go-to expert in analysis of DNA criminal cases. And you know why? Because she always seemed to come up with the evidence that got people found guilty. I mean, CBI said she worked in more than 10,000 cases in 29 years. She's allowed to retire in November 2023, just before the scandal broke. She has no prior criminal history, according to the charging document. A spokesperson of the CBI had no immediate comment on the arrest or charges. As of late last year, the CBI acknowledged it had uncovered 1,003 anomalies or irregularities in roughly 10% of all of her work. The embattled agency, though, has continued to say that its internal investigation did not show that she'd ever falsified DNA matches or fabricated profiles. Still, the ongoing judicial crisis has thrown the fate of an undetermined number of criminal cases into limbo, which annoys prosecutors and defense attorneys alike. Legal experts have said it could take years to untangle the mess. Not only is there deep concern that defendants may have been wrongfully imprisoned based on her DNA conclusions, but also prosecutors in at least 3 cases so far have said they felt forced to offer reduced charges and lighter sentences to suspects who'd been headed to trial. Just last week, the case against a murderer dissolved into a plea deal because neither prosecutor nor the defense wanted to risk going to trial because of the original DNA analysis being clouded over with suspicion. So there's that. And they interview a whole bunch of people here who talk about how this has affected their lives. As you can imagine, if you were convicted based on her testimony and her tests, well, now what? And so you're going to see a flurry of appeals, possibly, I don't know, maybe 1,000. And, it boils down to, we've talked before about how quite often prosecutors view it as their job to win cases. You want to win, right? It's the American thing. We win. And prosecutors aren't supposed to just win every case because presumably not everyone who's charged is guilty. There are some people who get charged, but they're not guilty, and they won't be found guilty, and they shouldn't be found guilty. And we know there are cases where the wrong person's put on trial. And ironically, I wrote a book about a guy in Colorado named Timothy Masters who was put on trial for a murder he did not commit. He wound up spending 10 years in prison. And the prosecutors in that case simply had a win-at-all-costs attitude. We're going to win this case. And when they won the case, they were out in the lobby of the courtroom high-fiving each other. And in later years, after Mr. Masters was released from prison, and the prosecutor's office was forced to apologize to him, and the district attorney actually issued a statement saying not only is his conviction vacated, but he's innocent. He didn't do it. He did. We now admit that it was the wrong guy. He didn't do it. But it goes back to that win at all cost mentality. And so I think many people understand how that comes about for a prosecutor or a defense attorney. Defense attorney's trying to win, prosecutor's trying to win. Okay? When you've got people in the crime lab who are trying to win at all costs. Wait a second. Now, that strikes me as odd because, the prosecutor and the defense, I would think their arguments are that they are trying to do some form of justice, some kind of legal process that's going to bring to light what the truth is about a situation. And I understand it's not always the case, but I'm talking about at a higher level here, higher level philosophically here, okay? But if you're a scientist working in a lab, do you owe a duty to the prosecution to try to get convictions? Or do you owe a duty to just science, right? I mean, did you take chemistry in high school or junior high or college? Ever? And did you ever have a chemistry professor or teacher ever tell you, hey, do this, and you should get these results? And if your results come out differently, just erase them and put in the results you want. Did you ever hear a chemistry teacher say that? No, of course not. And so if a laboratory technician, forensic scientist, whatever title you want to call them, has a sample of DNA and something's not working with it, their response should be, go back to the investigators and go, guys, that sample you got me ain't working. Sorry. Instead of saying, oh, the sample's not working, but you needed to do what now? That's obviously wrong. And so they say she did this in as many as 1,000 cases over a long period of time. And she's been charged with 102 felony charges. And some of the charges include things like attempting to influence a public servant. And to do that with bad motives or through improper means is illegal. And so if she gives bad test results to the prosecutor, says, yeah, go ahead and prosecute that guy. These test results show that he did it. And if she's done something funny with that data, that's a problem. So this is what's troubling to me, is that so many people rely upon the behind-the-scenes people. So somebody gets arrested. Well, they see the cop face-to-face. They go into court, they see the prosecutor face-to-face. And 3 days into their trial, a technician from the lab comes in and testifies and leaves. And that might be the one and only time they see that person. But we have this knee-jerk response to, well, the technicians have a job to do. Someone brings in a sample of something, goes, here, test this. And because they're in a laboratory, so disconnected, they might not have seen the crime scene. They might not know anything about the defendant. They might not know, they literally might just be told, here, this is a piece of evidence. I need you to do the following with it. Look for DNA, lift fingerprints off it. Tell me what it is, analyze it. And you think of them as being in this laboratory doing scientific work that's not influenced by something happening outside the walls of the building. That's what I think most people think. So juries, for instance, routinely look at somebody like that on a stand, especially if they present well, and goes, wow, they're an expert. And they say that this DNA they found here matches this guy, and it could not be a different person because they've narrowed it down to 1 in 10 billion. Meaning that, yes, he's the only person on Earth with that DNA. That guy did it. And why? Because that technician said so. That forensic scientist said so. And we've been trained, having watched so many TV shows about CSI and so on, especially with the cool music and the lighting and that they always get the facts right because they're doing science. Science doesn't lie. Science can't lie. But the scientists can, and that's the problem. So here, if these allegations bear out, number one, lock her up and throw away the key. Because think of all the people who got locked up because of her over all those decades, fudging with the evidence. Now, you might say, Steve, isn't it possible that some of the people that she fudged evidence on, assuming she did, some of them were guilty? So it doesn't make them innocent that she fudged the evidence. Well, there is an argument to be made that when somebody does something like that, they're doing it for a reason. It's not accidental that she messed with the evidence. She did that for a reason. So it leads you to believe that she wanted to get a certain result. Why did she want to get a certain result? It might be that she was told, by the way, here's a sample of the defendant's DNA, and here's a sample of DNA that we pulled off something else. Or here's something else that was touched or something by the defendant. Can you find DNA and try to match it with that? I mean, she doesn't have to be at the crime scene or in deep meetings with the prosecution to be manipulating the evidence in a certain way. And so I can tell you right now that I've heard of extremely sketchy cases that went to trial, and all kinds of stuff is up in the air, and then in comes the scientist who says, we tested the DNA, and the DNA on the sweater worn by the victim, there's 2 DNA types on there, 2 DNA samples. One from the victim, one from the defendant. Defendant testified or told investigators hadn't seen the victim ever. Never met them, never saw them, never interacted with them, was never anywhere near them. And yet their DNA is on the victim's sweater. How is that? Boom. All the other stuff goes out the window. And all it takes is that one key piece of evidence. And so, unfortunately, the evidence that this forensic scientist is handling is the stuff that everybody goes, that's the important stuff. That's the stuff we believe, the DNA and so on. So, very, very serious issue. They've now got to pull out 1,000 files and figure out what to do with them. About to go to trial, may have to drop the charges or cut a better deal for the defendant. Somebody's been convicted, possibly get a new trial. Somebody's been convicted and done their time and gotten out. What now? Well, you can clear up the conviction. That's not the hard part. How do you pay them back for the time they spent in prison? So this could get very ugly. And I'm not just talking about for her. I mean, if she goes to trial on this and they find her guilty of 102 felonies, I'm not sure what's going to happen there. They could lock her up and throw away the key. But what about all of the other people whose cases she tainted with her work? So, Mark, thanks for sending that from the denvergazette.com as a story. Former CBI forensic scientist booked into jail Wednesday on 102 felony charges. And Carol McKinley and Jenny Deem wrote that. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. One of the keys to happiness is patience.